Howdy y'all, Unky T here. Now, after posting that video yesterday about the climate change or carbon voodoo junk, anyways, I'm kind of off on theme here right now, so I've come across this video of Professor Peter Ridd. He is an Aussie, I believe. Anyways, what I will do is I'm going to leave a little bio on him in the bottom part thingy down there, and if y'all want to go learn about him and see what his bona fides are, and you can decide whether you believe him or not. But I certainly believe him, and I believe he is one of the leaders in his field as well. And so without further ado, I'm going to make this a two-parter because it's kind of long, so I thought I'd cut her up and make two separate videos if that's okay with y'all. And we'll go ahead and do that, and we'll see what y'all think.
Well, thank you very much. You've doubtless all heard that the Great Barrier Reef is on its last legs, and it's been smothered by sediment, polluted by fertiliser and pesticides, and it's killed by dredging and, of course, climate change. So who here, put your hands up, believes that story is true as a matter of interest? Right. Well, that's interesting. So, I mean, out there, almost everybody believes it true. There's literally hundreds of millions of people around the world who think that. So you guys now have got a little bit of a tricky question, because you've been told it's dead and you believe it's dead. So how are you going to tell this? Am I a whistleblower, and the world has been conned, or am I a complete lunatic? And of course, the way you decide is that you'll listen to my arguments, that this is the libertarian way. But unfortunately, that's not the way of a modern university, as we will see in a minute. So I'll give you, before we go into my little tricky situation with the university, I'll give you some facts about the reef. Climate change is supposed to be killing all the corals, but did you know that most of the corals that live on the Great Barrier Reef also live in Indonesia and Thailand, where the water is 1 or 2 degrees hotter, and they actually grow 50% faster there, in fact probably more. Coral bleaching, which you've heard such a lot about, is not a new phenomenon. It's been going on for 100 million years or so. It's like a bushfire. It looks terrible, but the corals rapidly recover from it. You would have heard statistics like 1/3 of the reef has died in the 2016 mass bleaching event. Well, actually, when you look at the statistics in a great deal of detail, and you've got to dig deep, I can tell you, you find that probably about 5% of the coral has died, maybe 10% if you really stretch the numbers ridiculously. That sounds like a lot of coral, but consider that between 2011 and 2016, the southern part of the Great Barrier Reef, the amount of coral increased by 250%. So the change of 5% or 10% downwards doesn't add up to a hill of beans. Sediment is supposed to be smothering the reef, and this is one of my area of expertise, because I was actually involved with inventing the instruments that have measured sediment out on reefs. So my group has done more measurements of sediment on the reef than anybody else, and probably everybody else put together. Turns out that there's about 100 times more sediment that gets resuspended from waves and goes onto the reef than comes down all the rivers from all the farms put together. And it's that wave stirring that's most important. And of course, then you have cyclones. They suspend so much sediment, it's just not funny. If you actually go out to the Great Barrier Reef, you're flat out even finding a single grain of sediment on the reef itself that comes from land. And you can tell whether it comes from land because the sediment on the reef is made out of broken down calcium carbonate, coral skeletons, totally different composition. And the sediment from land just isn't out there. Dredging is also supposed to be killing the reef, but in the last 2 decades, a couple of $100 million has been spent monitoring dredging operations to see how much it kills. And basically, apart from 1 or 2 in Western Australia where they actually dredge through a reef, you're flat out measuring even a single coral that dies in most of these things. And on that one where they did drill through the reef, they found that the effect of dredging goes maybe 2 or 3 kilometres. But most of the reefs on the Great Barrier Reef are well, on average 1,000 kilometres from a particular port, and are almost always between 50 and 100 kilometres from the nearest port, so they really are not affected. Coral growth rates have increased by 10% since the 1940s. Pesticides never get out to the reef in quantities that would affect the reef. In fact, they're in such low quantities you can barely even measure them, even with the most accurate scientific instruments. Crown of thorns starfish are entirely natural, and sediment cores indicate that there have been plagues of them around for time immemorial. They are not like cats or tame cane toads. They are actually a native Australian species, just like a kangaroo or an echidna. Coral certainly fluctuates in coral cover over time, but the amount of coral that we've got now is not significantly different to when records properly started to begin in 1985. But the scientific consensus is that the whole thing is on its last legs, and this is a big deal now if you're from North Queensland, because every single one of our major industries is affected by restrictions caused by the supposed demise of the Great Barrier Reef. Sugar, cattle, mining, port dredging, and the tourist industry, because the whole world knows that the reef is dead, so why bother coming? So the question is, how could this all be so wrong? It sounds like a bit of a crazy story, that so many scientists could be wrong, and I'm the only one. I'm not the only one, by the way, but I'm one of the few who thinks that this is all a load of rubbish. Well, I've actually got some bad news for you. This is not the only area where scientists get it wrong. Who here has heard of the replication crisis? Hands up. Who here has not heard of the replication crisis? All right. Well, frankly, shame on you, because it's the biggest thing in science in the last 40 years. But you do have an excuse, right? The replication crisis is where we're finding, when we try to repeat science that's already been done, we find it's wrong half the time, all right? So this is why you've never heard of it, because scientists don't tend to like to blow the trumpet on this one too much. Can you imagine any other profession where it's wrong half the time? You know, perhaps flying an aeroplane. Aeroplanes only crash half the time. Right? Now, this is just not me saying this, all right? This is the big journals and the big national science organisations. We're talking about this. Possibly the most famous quote on this is by a chap called Horton in the leading medical journal, The Lancet, very famous. He said, "The case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue, afflicted by studies with small sample size, tiny effects, invalid exploratory analysis, flagrant conflicts of interest together with an obsession for fashionable ideas of dubious importance. Science has taken a turn towards darkness." And then John Ioannidis from Stanford University, who in my view is actually the father of the replication crisis, wrote a very famous paper which has been cited more than any other paper in the last few years, called "Why Most Published Findings Are False." He reckons that we're wasting about 85% of our science resources following bad science, effectively down a rat hole. So yes, scientists can get it wrong, and they can get it a lot wrong, and a lot of scientists can get it all wrong on one particular thing without any problems. All right, so how did this get me into a spot of bother? Well, for the IPA, I wrote a chapter in the book on climate change and how climate change affects the reef, or doesn't affect the reef. The IPA organised an interview with the Alan Jones where I said the words to the effect that in the light of the replication crisis, which shows about a 50% failure rate, if organisations use solely peer review as their checking mechanism, then their results could not be trusted. 50% isn't trustworthy. Now, it was a tough thing that I said, and I named a couple of organisations, and I did not expect them to be particularly happy with that. I expected them to argue. You know, "Peter, you're wrong because," well, whatever. But what actually happened, well, I was called into my dean's office and given a brown envelope with allegations of serious misconduct. By the way, serious misconduct, the difference between serious and normal misconduct is you can be fired for serious. So they chose that one. They told to keep all the allegations secret. In my view, that was in total contravention of my work contract. I contacted the IPA just to let them know what was going on, and they were very generous and they gave me some legal help, and there was quite a bit of legal to and fro. JC was very insistent that everything was kept secret. The legal things were going pretty well for that, for me, I thought. But then I got called up to the Dean's office a second time and given 25 more serious misconduct allegations, mostly for not keeping things secret. They trawled through my emails. They had no reason to do it. They trawled through my emails for dirt. They read every single one. And I can tell you that you start to sweat when you're reading a 128-page document of allegations which they've dredged from your emails. You wonder, well, what have I said? And when I got to the end of it, I breathed a huge sigh of release because I'd actually not said anything that I was ashamed of, which was a surprise. But some of the allegations were really incredible. They objected to me emailing my wife. In another email, this was emailing my wife about the allegations. In another email, I complained to a friend that the university was Orwellian for not allowing me free speech. So JCU then read my emails and complained that I was not allowed to call them Orwellian. I thought it must have been a joke, that they actually had some sorts of sense of humour, but actually they just didn't realise that they had proven themselves to be Orwellian and that Big Brother really was watching me. I'll show that they don't had a sense of humour a little bit as well. The case dragged on for some time, legal to and fro, and it was draining resources, but we decided to file in court to fight it, right? In my opinion, at that stage, the university wasn't expecting us to do that, and they certainly weren't expecting the fight or the really bad publicity that was coming about. So as soon as we filed, within a day or so, they gave me a final censure, your last thing, and told me to keep it secret. Except to my wife, they agreed that I could talk to her, which was nice of them.
Oh, there you go, my friends. I'm going to cut it off right there on a happy note, and I'll get to work on that second part of this later on today. I'll try to have it out by tonight or tomorrow. As you can see, and there's just kind of a trend that I'm seeing with all these videos and all these experts, and that this climate change is a pseudoscience. It isn't the real science, it's scientism. It's like a religion to them. But anyways, we'll touch on that tomorrow. Y'all have a blessed day. You take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we'll see you real soon. Bye for now.